Okay, so our topic is whether industry-funded research is biased or not. So 3 of us are saying that it is, or that it can be, and 2 of us are saying that it doesn't always have to be, or that it's not. So my point of view is that it is, or that it can be biased, and so one of the studies that I'm looking at is by Sylvia Rowe and others. It's called Funding Food Science and Nutrition Research, Financial Conflicts and Scientific Integrity. It was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in May 2009. One of the main things her and the others who wrote the article talked about were the difference between conflict of interest and bias, because I think bias can be truthful, but sometimes it can just manipulate information to follow certain viewpoints. Whereas conflict of interest can be more easily dealt with, but there's always a possibility for bias, whether intentional or not. So the issue with federal funding for nutritional research, the article focuses on funding and conflicts of interest from industries, even though Rowe states that there is room for bias regardless of the funding source. So that was one of the things that she talked about that could be a bias in her own article. There are checks already set up, such as requiring researchers to indicate funding, having peer-reviewed articles, or in more academic environments, many researchers are reviewed and investigated for errors or irregularities, as well as for fraud. This can impact job promotions as well, though it seems also very possible for bias or conflicts of interest to play in this as well. If they have someone in their department that wants them to write a paper on a certain thing, that can also introduce bias, so that's also something I kind of disagree with her. Marianne Nestle, in her blog Food Politics, written in November 20th, 2013, titled Conflicts of Interest in Nutritional Sciences or Societies, American Society of Nutrition, talks about how many members of the editorial board for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 7 of 12 have major corporate affiliations. So even higher up in the ranks for these journals, there are conflicts of interest that could lead to biases. So culturally and personally, I think the biggest issue with some of these ideas is that they become mainstream and the average person does not have the research skill to determine whether or not a source has bias or has a conflict of interest. We are also at a time where I feel people are becoming more into health trends and have become untrustworthy of most things. New and conflicting information comes out so often that nobody knows what to believe anymore. And they're untrustworthy of these, the meat, dairy, and egg industries. And so even if it's factually true that these things can be beneficial, people have just become really untrustworthy. So that's part of the cultural impact right now.
So mine's more of an argument. But it piggybacks off yours, because I've always had a strong interest in health and nutrition, and I've always looked to improve in eating habits. And researching on my own, I also end up following nutrition trends. The topic of industry bias in the topic of industry bias in nutrition research resonates with me because I feel that now more than ever, with all the resources available to us, the truth is hard to find, like you said. A quote by medical doctor Leonard Lesser can better summarize the impact of this type of bias, the impact that this type of bias has on the public. He says, whereas bias in pharmaceutical research could have an adverse effect on the health of millions of individuals who take medications, bias in nutritional research can have an adverse effect on the health of everyone. Lesser wrote an article, I think it was published in 2017, and it looked at the beverage industry. The article found that there was a strong connection between the type of funding and the conclusions drawn. While looking through the data, Lesser found that along with the researchers in charge of the studies, the institutions funding them had a big role in deciding what kind of information is disclosed to the public. Additionally, little information is available regarding the prevalence or the impact of funding by the industry in nutrition research. So basically what it's saying is the industry has a big role that they play on what kind of information gets out and what we actually know about the research, right? This is also very important because it shows that, like I said, the industry has a strong hold on what kind of information we hear. Lesser's article concludes that scientific articles are commonly used. Scientific articles about commonly consumed beverages funded entirely by industry were approximately 4 to 8 times more likely to be favorable to the financial interests of the sponsor than articles without industry-related funding. This brings me to the second point regarding an analysis done by Tufts University, which looked at the research done on carbonated drinks. This analysis concluded that 26 out of 26 studies done by researchers with strong ties to soda makers reported that their drinks had no links to poor health. In contrast, 97% of independent studies reported that sugary or carbonated drinks had a very strong link to obesity and diabetes. All in all, this number shows strong evidence to prove that industry-funded research can have a severe effect on the health of the general public.
To the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, this article is about how all relevant parties shall conduct or sponsor research that's factual, transparent, and designed objectively and according to accepted principles of scientific inquiry. The research design will generate an appropriately phrased hypothesis, and the research will answer the appropriate questions rather than favor a particular outcome. Require control of both study design and research itself to remain with scientific investigators. Not offer or accept remuneration geared to the outcome of a research project. Ensure before the commencement of studies that there is a written agreement that the investigative team has the freedom and obligation to attempt to publish the findings within some specified timeframe. Require in publications and conference presentations full signed disclosure of all financial interests. Not participate in undisclosed paid authorship arrangements in industry-sponsored publications or presentations. Guarantee accessibility to all data and control of statistical analysis by investigators and appropriate auditors/reviewers. Require that academic researchers, when they work in contract research organizations or act as contract researchers, make clear statements of their affiliation, and require that such researchers publish only under the auspices of the CRO.
Hello all, my name is Risa Enrique, and the argument that is being presented is whether or not industry-funded research is biased. My position is yes, it is biased. There was a study conducted with researchers from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health alongside the University of California, San Francisco. This was a comprehensive review of artificial sweetener, which showed that reviews funded by artificial sweetener companies were nearly 17 times more likely to have favorable results. One of the researchers stated how the results of these studies are even more important than the conclusion, as the actual results are used in the development of dietary guidelines. Those who have completed studies with authors of conflicting interest were about 7 times more likely to have favorable conclusions. None of the 9 participants in the study that had authors without a conflict of interest reported positive results. It has also been shown that the industry may interfere at all steps of the research pipeline. This can be done through both fundamental and clinical research, ghostwriting of certain findings, and decision-making. Evidence from other fields suggests that while in the past industry trials may have had quality deficits, more recent trials funded by industry do better than non-industry funded trials. Based on these findings and studies, I stand by my initial statement that industry-funded research is biased.
An article from the Huffington Post, based on research from the Charles Perkins Center at the University of Sydney, states that bias is found in industry-funded research, but mainly in the conclusions, which are the author's interpretation of the data. Based on this research, there is no evidence of the data being tampered with. The only bias that may be found in industry-funded research is within the words of the author, but the data is left alone, meaning the research funded by industries can be used regardless of bias because the studies will still have the true results presented.